Live. I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. Hopefully it'll stay a little stable. Hello, Hajo. Thank you for taking some time. I know you have a lot of people here to talk to and a lot of things that you could be doing. So I appreciate you taking some time to talk to me.
Not at all.
So this is the American Geophysical Union annual fall meeting. We're in Washington, D.C. right now. How many AGUs have you been to?
Around 21.
That's almost 20% of all the 100 years.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention that. And I've almost been at every one since 98, actually, since moving to Alaska.
That is exciting. And representing UAF and being a part, as you've moved up through the ranks, you are now the director of the International Arctic Research Center?
Yeah, that's right.
What's it like to be a director?
It's great because you get sort of that treetop or mountaintop level perspective of what's happening in the research world. We've got great researchers working with us, great students, great staff. It's really a fantastic team that you have to work with. And at the same time, you can still, as director of a center that's as active, but also somewhat more compact, like IARC is, I can still be part of the research community. And what I see my role as is combining research that I'm interested in with the research interests of researchers at IARC, the International Arctic Research Center, and seeing how we can navigate best and look at the most interesting, exciting stuff that also has, of course, some funding support.
What's the difference between a center, a college, a school, all those things?
All of those, yeah. So basically, on the academic side, if you talk about instructional programs, academic degrees, you've got the schools and the colleges. The centers and the institutes are sort of similar types of animals, if you will. Our IARC is called a center, but technically it's a research institute at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, just like the Geophysical Institute of Arctic Biology. So we have, as a center, we bring together different perspectives, different types of expertise. We're home, for example, to the Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is a combination of a federal and a university entity. We're home to the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy. We're home now to the Center for Arctic Policy Studies. So it's a great group of different, we sort of have what we call part of the IARC family, these different subunits, and the fun part is seeing how those can interact and how, as a whole, we can help move the field forward.
You are you just talked at the UAF booth here, and the booth is a great place for sort of mingle, network, it's a central location, all that sort of stuff.
I agree.
You were talking about using science and working together with science and diplomacy. That sounds like a hard nut to crack.
It is, and we, of course, our main interest is cutting edge research, but as an international Arctic research center, we also find ourselves doing a lot of coordination of research at the national, international level, and very important, we're also providing a lot of information for decision makers. So we're taking the research and we're translating it, or right from the start, increasingly, we're working with decision makers, various people who have an interest in the Arctic, who live there, who depend on the Arctic, and jointly with them develop research projects. And in that context, because we're doing it at an international level, we're increasingly finding that these international partnerships are becoming more and more important as you see greater interest in the Arctic, but also at the government level, sometimes more challenging situations evolve in terms of collaboration. So the research community, scientists, are in some ways natural diplomats, right? They're reaching out to their colleagues in a whole bunch of different countries. They're passionate about the same types of questions. They're on the same page with respect to what type of methods do we use, how do we approach these types of problems. And so we're increasingly aware of that important role, and we're trying to see how can we best take what the true diplomats have developed in terms of effective ways of international collaboration, bring that into our own work, but at the same time also make their work in the diplomacy realm more effective, at least at the Arctic international level.
What strikes me so much about the countries of the Arctic, the 6, 7 Arctic nations, 8 Arctic nations, not to mention the First Nations of the world,
exactly,
that
the
also are
indigenous
involved
peoples
in
of the Arctic,
is that they usually, when they're talking about science and research, they forget where their borders are, and it's all about saving the planet.
Yeah, great example. And that's a very similar thing between what are known as the permanent participants of the Arctic Council, so the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. In northern Alaska, you have the Inupiat, who are the indigenous people of northern Alaska, and then across the border in Canada, you have the Inuvialuit, but they're all part of the same family relations, and the same thing over in Siberia. You have the Siberian Yupik, who are both in Alaska, St. Lawrence Island in particular, and then over in the Russian Federation. So those boundaries, the recent boundaries, the nation-state boundaries, really don't exist for the indigenous peoples. And it's interesting that in the research world, there's a lot of scientific collaboration that predates World War II, even World War I. So you have long-term relationships and scientific collaboration frameworks that have been set up as far away as 150 years ago, and it's on those types of relationships that we're building a lot of our work in the Arctic.
Do national leaders recognize that that's a thing that exists, or are they so focused on defending the people that elect them?
Well, I think it depends what the issues are, right? I mean, if you have highly contested issues, but a great example in my mind is that there is an increasing recognition internationally at the high levels of political systems. What do we do about the changing Arctic? So one way to respond is the so-called Arctic Science Ministerial meeting. So that's a meeting of the science ministers of all the 8 Arctic nations and a bunch of other non-Arctic nations. The most recent one, this has happened twice now. First time was in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago. And the second time just happened in October in Berlin, Germany. It was co-hosted by Berlin, the European Union, and Finland, the current chair of the Arctic Council, and brought together both the science ministers and if you will, the politicos or the representatives of the executive government, basically, and scientists. So it was a very intense meeting, but I think it demonstrates that these different countries, both Arctic and non-Arctic, recognize the importance of the Arctic, but also the importance of collaboration. And they know that they can rely on the research community, but also on these connections among indigenous peoples of the Arctic to help deal with challenges in international space.
I just got a quick question, because what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, as I've been hearing for years now. Is every nation in the world an Arctic nation?
Well, no. I mean, so you got to be exactly. I mean, in the end, you have to understand I mean, there's the 8 Arctic nations who have their own sovereign territories in the Arctic, right? You have increasingly, if you look to Canada, you have the First Nations or the indigenous peoples of Canada itself who have increasing sovereignty in Canada. So that, of course, that's different from a country outside of the Arctic. But what's interesting and important to recognize is that the central part of the Arctic Ocean, so the seas just around the North Pole, those are international waters. They're governed by the Convention of the Law of the Seas. That's an area that's of joint interest. And again, that's where, even with everything that's going on in the day-to-day politics at the global level, in October, the 8 Arctic nations and Japan, China, and Korea, and the European Union signed an agreement to say we will put a hold on fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean, this international space. We will collaborate through scientific research in determining how is that region evolving with the rapid change we're seeing, and what do we have to know in order to put in place a sustainable fisheries, for example, management regime.
And that opens up a whole area of scientific collaboration for the future.
Exactly.
You are studying the changing climate in the Arctic, and the people who have lived in the Arctic for tens of thousands of years still live there.
Yeah.
Are they a valuable resource for scientific inquiry?
Well, you can't call, I mean, I'd be careful calling them a resource. They are the first peoples of the Arctic. They have a very thorough understanding.
I guess to be their knowledge as a resource is not the people themselves, but the knowledge that they've accumulated.
And increasingly, I think it's being recognized that there's sort of a, it used to be that you have academic knowledge, the knowledge that's generated at the universities on the one hand, and then you have what's now mostly referred to as indigenous knowledge, sometimes referred to as traditional knowledge, traditional environmental knowledge here on the other, and they're separate, but increasingly we're seeing there's sort of a continuous spread between these different forms of knowledge. There's local knowledge, and the Arctic is a great space that poses problems to people living there and people outside of the Arctic that can only be solved if you take all of these different forms of knowledge and develop solutions. And that's something that, in my mind, is exciting about Arctic research now, is that we're just trying to figure out how to do that well and in a way that helps us address these challenges.
And you're in a great position to do that as the IARC director and in Fairbanks. You can
exactly.
You can lead
UAF
the charge.
Is a fantastic place to do this work because you have a strong Alaska Native and Indigenous peoples component to the university with the College of Community and Rural Development, the Indigenous Studies programs, you have the strong environmental research, you have policy research. This is the place to be. You know, a lot of other universities are covering part of that, if at all. You know, we have all of that in one place, and in a place where, in my mind, collegiality, respect, and passion for each other's work is as high as anywhere that I've seen it in the world.
Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk to me. I know you've got a lot of people to talk to and some friends to catch up with too. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.